Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name is Trevor Muir and I like to talk about teaching, whether it's stories and ideas from my own classrooms or lessons that I've learned from other educators along the way. I love to explore ways to help students grow and thrive in school and for their educators to thrive as well. And so that's what this podcast is. Whatever you teach or however you serve in schools, how can you lead a more impactful, dynamic, meaningful, and epic classroom? All right, well, thanks for coming back to the podcast. It's been a little bit since I've recorded one of these, and that's not for any particular reason other than the fact that spring is just a wild time to be an educator. It's busy. It's hectic sometimes, but then to add on to the hecticness, actually, I was just looking, the last time I recorded a podcast was at the very end of March. And then just a few days later, you might already know this, you might want to just fast forward past this, but I don't know, I'll just give you the little story. A few days after I recorded the last podcast, it was my son's 10th birthday, and he was turning to double digits, and it was exciting. And one of the things that we do every year for our kids is we tape balloons outside their door, and we hold those balloons in place with streamers so that when they open their door inwards, when they come out in the morning, all these balloons fall on top of them. And we started this tradition when my son Jack was 2 years old, and every single year it's just an expectation that when they come out in the morning, all the balloons fall down on them. And so back on April 8th, we had all the balloons tied up over Jack's door, and we were all super excited. And on his 10th birthday, it's a big one, he opens the door, and they all tumbled in on him, and we're all laughing and having fun early in the morning. And I said, all right, let's go downstairs and have a big breakfast before school on your 10th birthday. And so I was like, oh, why don't you grab some of these balloons and bring them with us? And so I reached down to grab one of the balloons myself, and I turn at the top of my stairs, and I do not get a firm footing, and I slip down onto my back, and I start tumbling down the stairs. Then about halfway down them, I hear this branch snap. It was like this. I was probably even louder. It was more like this. Sorry for the detail, but it snapped really, really loud. And I got to the bottom, and I was like, what just happened? And I tried to stand up, and I collapsed. And as soon as I hit the ground after collapsing, trying to put weight on my now broken fibula bone, I passed out cold. I mean, like I literally fainted on the ground, and my kids thought I was dead. Like they were just like, Dad! And they ran down, and my wife got down there, and after 30 seconds, she was able to wake me up. And I don't know if I'm soft or what, or the doctor said I went into shock, but I was passed out cold, and I woke up, and my leg was just throbbing and on fire, and some friends came over and got me into their van and brought me to the ER, where they found out that I completely snapped my fibula bone, and it did not look very good on the x-rays. Luckily, a week later, I went back, and they discovered that it broke really nicely. If your leg can break in a nice way, this is how you do it. It snapped very clean and back into place with minimal damage to my ligaments and tendons. And so it's just been 6 weeks of slowly getting back into it, I went from a cast into a walking boot, and I actually should be out of the walking boot very soon. So that's where I've been the last 6 weeks. And it has been a good amount of time to learn to slow down a bit, because I like to be moving. I like to be on my feet, and I love to run and play and go fishing and hiking. And as the weather's finally getting nice here in Michigan, it's the time you can start doing that. But there's been a lot of hindrances to that. I've been prohibited. And so I've had to learn how to find contentment from the sitting position. And it's been good. It's been really good to learn. Actually, you might have just heard that ding. That was the doctor confirming that I'm going to be there tomorrow morning. Email to get this dang cast off, hopefully. But anyway, I just wanted to fill you in on that. It's been a good season. It's been tough. It's been challenging to learn how to go at a different pace, but it's also been really good to learn that, hey, you can do that. You're not defined just by your activity. You're defined by the people you surround yourself with. I've been just so blessed by so many friends and family caring for me and my family during this time. I threw it out on the internet, on social media, and just let everybody who follows along with the Epic Classroom what happened, and just the outpouring of love from complete strangers has just been so good, right? It's so good for the soul sometimes to just see the goodness in other people. So yeah, we're getting back at it. I actually just went to New York City this past weekend for a really fun speaking gig up just north of the city. We got to go give a few keynotes at an amazing tech conference up there. And then I spent the weekend after that with my wife in New York. And on this broken, booted up leg, I was able to cover over 15 miles. So can't hold me down for long, but it's good to be back at it a little bit here. So anyway, that's my little update. That's where I've been. Hopefully we can start cranking out more podcasts now that I'm starting to find a little bit more normalcy. But it is just good to check in with you all. Whoever's listening out there to this podcast, I always get such a kick out of the fact that people want to listen to these. So thanks for tuning in. I want to just get a little touchy-feely today. I made a video recently, and it's called The Impact of Teachers. And I don't do this all the time because it's a lot of work, but if you follow along beyond just the podcast, I love to make videos. And quite often they're videos I shoot down in my own little studio in my basement, or I just pull out my phone and shoot them as one does. But every now and then, I have this unbelievable filmmaker named Dominic who is just unbelievably talented, and he helped me when he was only 18 years old, helped me film the very first book trailer I ever had for my book, The Epic Classroom, that came out back in like 2017. Dom came and helped me film one of those videos, and I was like, holy smokes, this kid is talented. And so ever since 2017 when we filmed that video, once a year, twice a year, Dom and I get together and we make a really cool video. And you might have seen some of these, the Epic Classroom video, the Collaborative Classroom book trailer. I made a bunch during COVID, like one called Normal, one called The Noise of School, another one called Teaching Isn't Easy. I did one last year about my poem, The Superhero Mountain Climber. And so you can check all those out. We just made another one though. Because, as I was sitting with this broken leg of mine, it gave me a lot of time to just to reflect and think back. And, my own kids, I mentioned my son, Jack, who just turned 10. We were able to recoup. We were able to save his birthday, by the way. Daddy had a broken leg that morning, but that afternoon I had to suck it up a little bit. And we had a big cake, and we made some good memories. But, I look at my kids, and they've gone through school, and it's just tremendous the way they've grown there. Both of my kids were naturally pretty shy, and they still are in the best ways. But then also they were timid, and yet just through their experience in school and all of the ways their teachers have stretched them and pushed them and given them new opportunities, the confidence they've grown there, the way that they have just become something I could have never expected. So much of it is owed to their time in classrooms. And it's owed to these people who don't get paid enough, right? Don't get the accolades they deserve, are unbelievably educationally qualified. It's so much of it is owed to them. And so I've just had time to reflect about it. And I wrote a little up a video. I had this idea for a video where I just walked through a school sharing stories of some of these teachers who impacted me years and years ago, and how that impact keeps going. And so I wrote it down, and then Dominic and I met at my kids' elementary school, and we filmed this video, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things we've made because it's just personal. Like, it just rings true to me. But then anytime I share these same stories with other teachers, it seems to ring, or anybody, not just teachers, anybody, people are like, oh yeah, I remember doing that. Or I remember that feeling. Or I had this teacher who did this in this way in my life, and like I still remember them. Or I'm a teacher because of this teacher. Or I'm an avid reader. Or I'm a mathematician. Or I work in the sciences. I do this because of this teacher. I hear it all the time, and so I just wanted to encapsulate it with this video. But I wanted to tell a couple of those stories right here, maybe just to direct you and point you towards a video. It's only like 4 minutes long, and you can find it. I'll put it in the show notes to this podcast. But I just want to share a couple of these videos, and then after that, I want to reflect a moment about why we remember our experiences from school in such a defined and unique way, right? Like if I said, hey, tell me something about your middle school experience, you would probably be able to go back to middle school and tell me some details that are still with you, that still exist in your brain. I want to explore why is some of this still in our brains, and then how can we as educators really try to create experiences with our students that they are going to remember years and years later. So let's go through memory lane real quick. I remember being in first grade, and just so vividly, my teacher, Mrs. Johnson, sat down next to me, and I finished my very first book ever. It was called Mac and Tab. You might remember those workbooks. And I remember finishing Mac and Tab, and this teacher lost her ever-loving mind in front of me. She jumped up and threw papers in the air and was grabbing me by the shoulders and shaking me and just celebrating like crazy. And I remember so vividly in my little first grade mind, just thinking like, she needs to chill out a bit. Like, what are you doing? Why is she freaking out so much? And yet I remember so vividly just being so proud of myself. I remember just loving the affirmation this first grade teacher was giving me. And I hold on to that. I remember it so vividly. I remember a few years later, I was doing the presidential physical fitness test. Do you remember that? Do you remember when, if you grew up in the 90s like I did, maybe the 80s too, where they would have kids do a bunch of push-ups and sit-ups, and you'd have to run a mile. And if you checked off all the boxes and you did it fast enough, you would get a reward from the government. Like the President Clinton would send you an award and say, hey, congratulations, you are fit. And I remember it was such a big deal in elementary school. And I did all of the things right except for the mile run. I didn't run it fast enough. And so I found out I wasn't going to get the presidential physical fitness test. But my PE teacher, he said, hey, Trevor, I know you really want to win this. How about I come to your neighborhood on a Saturday morning and you run it one more time for me? Why don't you practice? And then I'll come by and I'm going to time you. And if you run it fast enough, I'll send in those results. And so he did. He showed up on a Saturday. On the weekend, you know he wasn't being paid for that. He showed up on a Saturday with his stopwatch, and I ran a mile, and I ran it fast enough this time. And he sent in those results. And I just got to say, it felt pretty darn good committing fraud against the federal government with my favorite fourth grade teacher, maybe fifth grade. We committed fraud together, and it was all right. I still remember that guy. Right, I still remember. I remember when I was in sixth grade, I lost the school spelling bee on the word treacherous. I had no idea there was an A in there. I spelled it perfect, except I dropped the A, and I was so embarrassed. I mean, it's funny. You get older and you realize, like, oh, some of these thoughts you had back then about how people are judging you and watching every single move you make. You realize, like, no, they weren't. Kids were far less concerned and consumed with your details than you could have ever imagined, right? Like I remember sixth grade, I've worked with enough sixth graders since then. They're all worried about themselves. They don't have the time and energy to worry about everybody else. But I didn't know that at the time. And I thought everybody must thought I was some type of idiot for losing the spelling bee. And I remember later that day, I was in the school library sitting there and I was crying. I remember I was in tears because I thought I was feeling shame and embarrassment, and it doesn't sound like a big deal now, almost 30 years later, but boy, at the time it felt like a big deal. And I remember another sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Bandy, came up to me and she saw me crying there and she said, hey, Trevor, are you okay? And I just kind of was like, yeah, I'm all right. And I'll never forget, she said, is this about a girl? Did somebody break your heart? And you can realize why she asked that. That's why you might think a 12-year-old was crying publicly in the library. But I was like, no, I lost the spelling bee. And I caught a little hint of a smile, but she pulled it right back in and she didn't laugh at me. Right? She just said, oh, that must have been really hard. And I don't know, I loved the woman for it. I appreciated the way she didn't laugh at me, because even in that moment I felt silly, but she didn't call it silly. She treated me seriously, and that sticks with me years and years later. Just like when I got in a fight in ninth grade because I was being mean to this kid in band class. And I said something really terrible to him, and I only did it because I thought it was going to impress a girl. Turns out she did not find it impressive that I was being mean to somebody. And as soon as I said something mean, this kid went behind my back and he took a music stand and he smashed me in the lower back with it. I even still have a small little scar on my lower back from where he hit me with the music stand. And so I turned around and I swung at him and I missed, but I tried to hit him in the face, and then everybody broke us up. And I remember the assistant the assistant principal, Mr. Schuyler. He was this big, strong, tough guy. He sat us down. And by the way, he probably wasn't that tough. Mr. Schuyler, I know you follow along to some of the stuff I put out nowadays, so you weren't that tough, but I thought you were. And he sat me down, and he sat me and this other kid down, and we both got to give our story. And I told Mr. Schuyler, I was like, I've never been in a fight before, sir, which was true. And I said, I didn't even hit him. And I only swung at him because he hit me first. And Mr. Schuyler looked me right in the eye. He said, yeah, but Trevor, you picked this fight. I'm sorry, you're suspended. And he sent me home. And I was so mad at him. The injustice of this situation. I didn't even hit the kid. Looking back, I am so glad Mr. Schuyler sent my butt home after that. I had it coming, right? I picked that fight, and I learned a lesson that day that I took with me every single day the rest of my life is, hey, if you want to run your mouth, there are consequences. If you want to be mean, there are consequences. Or, hey, you can try to talk your way out of some things, but you will be held accountable. And I was, and it was good. Right? I had this teacher in 10th grade, Mrs. Perry, who was an absolute hawk about perfection, and she demanded it. If you did one little thing wrong, like you just misspelled something, she'd make you go and spell it correctly. Or if you misplaced a comma or a period in an MLA citation page, works cited to be exact, she would send it back. She did not settle for anything less than perfection in my work. And sometimes she'd make me stay after school, and she just frustrated me to no end. And I was like, she is only doing this because she has it out for me, right? She doesn't hold anybody else to this standard, but she holds me to it. Fast forward, I became a creative writing major, and I've since written 3 books, and I've taught countless writing classes and countless ELA 9, 10, 11, and 12 classes. I am an intense lover of reading and writing, and I have learned so much in my life about becoming more detail conscious and making sure that you are striving to put out your very best work. And I owe so much of all of that to Mrs. Perry. Oh, I had a teacher named Mr. Peters who helped me get through my parents' divorce. He would just cut out time every day and listen to me. He would just make this time to share stories with me that made me feel better, but then more than anything, to listen to me to tell my own stories. And I can't even think of the words to express my gratitude to that man. You know, it's just when I share these stories with you right now, it's like, yeah, it brings you back to that moment, but then you look at the journeys that happened since then, how formational those moments are in my identity, in my future, in my career now, in my parenthood, in my being a person. So much of it is owed to these people, these people who dedicated their knowledge and passion and energy and hearts to me, had a massive impact on my life. You know, for years now, I've worked at Grand Valley State University, a university here in Grand Rapids, where I've taught this class all about the impact that education has on our identity and society at large. It's all about helping students realize the importance of school because it's so easy to just go through it. I mean, we all did. There's 66 million kids going through the education system right now in America. 66 million kids who are having teachers and are sitting in desks and are learning and are being held to a certain standard and are developing skills and acquiring knowledge. There's just millions of us. And so it's so easy to just go through the 13 plus years of formal education and think like, yeah, this is just what you do. But it's like, no, it's not just what you do. This is your childhood you are spending in school, right? This is some of the most formational time that you have on this planet is spent in classrooms and in hallways and on playing fields. And it's impactful. And so that's what I do in this class, is helping students realize this is how impactful school is. And so this is why we need to take it seriously. This is why, as a society, we need to fund it and resource schools. This is why, as a society, we need to make sure that we are supporting educators and supporting our local school districts, whether you have your kids in them or not. This is why school is a priority, because how impactful it actually is. As I have my own kids now going to school, it just puts on a whole nother layer of the importance of it. The importance of supporting their teachers. I am so grateful for these people. I'm grateful for you. This is why I do this podcast. I don't get paid to put this podcast out into the world. I don't monetize videos like the one I just made, The Impact of Teachers. I make it because I just have this profound sense of gratitude for educators, as one myself, but as somebody who's been so deeply impacted by them. I feel like we have to do everything we can to support this work. And so as I look at these stories I just shared with you, and I bet you if we could sit down together, and by the way, if you happen to be at any of the events I'm going to this summer, whether it's in Charlotte County, Florida next week, or in Yorktown, Indiana the following week, or if you're at the conference in Killington, Vermont in June, or if you're in Dallas at AISD, or Los Alamos, New Mexico, or Davison, Michigan, any of the other places I'm going to be this summer, I love to hear your stories as well. That's one of the fun things of getting to go around and talk to teachers now too, is getting to hear these same type of formational, impacting stories that they have as well. I shared some stories from my life and my teaching experience and students this last weekend up in New York City, or up in Armonk. And I share these stories, and then people love, and I love this so much, to line up afterwards and say, hey, I heard this story. Here's my own version of it. Right? Like, oh, I heard you share about this student. Here's a story of a student I had. And every time it just makes me tear up and just feel all the feels, because this is good stuff. And it's like, why is it such good stuff? Why are these stories so memorable? Why are they so impactful? Why do they stick with us so much longer? I was doing some reading on science and the brain and how it all works, and there's 6 different primary reasons why our brains retain stories like this from school. And I just wanted to briefly just share those with you as we think about, all right, how do I become, or how do I continue to be or reinforce the type of educating? How do I become the educator I want to be, that my students not just remember me as like a fond person, but remember the lessons occurring in my classroom, that it can have an impact on them in a positive way years later. So those 6 things are emotional impact. Actually, let's just go one by one. So emotional impact. Our memories, so many of them are tied to strong emotions, and sometimes the stronger the emotion, the more vivid and long-lasting that memory is actually going to be. It turns out our brains, when we feel these significant feelings, like when we feel joy or fear or sadness or excitement, this activates a part of our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala, it does our emotional processing. As I'm sitting there and I'm feeling all this shame and sadness and embarrassment of losing the spelling bee, my amygdala is starting to process that. And what happens is our amygdala coincides and works hand in hand with what's called the hippocampus, which stores our long-term memories. And the amygdala helps send that information into the permanent storage bin. And so when we have these big emotional experiences, it's retaining, it's encoding in our brains, and we hold on to them years and years later. Emotional stuff sticks with us. That's why, every single story I told you, whether it's reading for the first time or feeling proud of myself, or seeing that teacher record me win the Presidential Fitness Award, or getting in trouble and being held accountable. These are all emotional experiences, and our brains hold on to these emotional experiences. But then another thing that really sticks with us is actually novelty and uniqueness. When we have unique or unusual events that happen, it activates this distinctive events. It activates the long-term storage because usually, if there's something new happening, that impacts our ability to survive more of those type of things down the road. Our brain, it's kind of like the lizard brain part of our thinking, our neurological systems. Hey, I experienced this for the first time. I need to remember this, so if it happens again, I'll know how to handle it. It's going back to our early selves when we had to survive, and our brains are equipped to be able to do that for us. And so when we have new and unique experiences, we remember them. And again, I look back at these stories I shared, and it's like, yeah, a lot of this was new as well. These were the first times I experienced this, the first time reading, the first time winning this award, the first time having a teacher who was really, really tough on me, but they weren't just being tough. Maybe it wasn't the first time, but they weren't just being tough to be tough for tough's sake. They were doing it because they cared so much and they saw potential. This was new to me, and so therefore I remember it. Another thing that deeply impacts our memory is our sensory details, our ability to see and smell and hear and taste and feel. When those are connected to an experience, we remember it so much more. I can still remember being in that band classroom and feeling the sticky floor from where everybody was emptying out the spit from their instruments. And so the floor was like permanently sticky. And I just remember that. And I remember that day when that kid hit me with the music stand and swing it back at him and getting in trouble. I remember the feeling of the room. I remember sweating because it was early in the year in August in Florida. And I just remember all of that. And that helps us stick as well. The fourth cause of strong memories and impacting has to do with personal significance, having events that mean something to us, that are a part of our own narrative. When it really directly aligns with our own selves, we remember it more, which again, gosh, when we're kids growing up, the whole world seems to revolve around us. And so when there are personal encounters, that sticks with us as well. When teachers make time for individuals, the way Mr. Peters made specific time for me, not just for the class. I mean, he was a great man to the whole collective, the group. I remember loving the way he taught and cared for everybody. But when he created specific time for me, that was significant enough to impact my memory. The fifth one is stress. Stress, it helps us remember as well. Stressful situations are enduring memories in our minds. It has to do with the hormones that are released, like cortisol. This helps with the consolidation of memories within our hippocampus, within our emotions. Our amygdala opens up when we are stressed. Not to say stress is always welcomed, but it does have an impact on the way that we remember. That stuff sticks with us. But then the last one is repetition and rehearsal, right? Like the frequency that we recall a certain memory. And I think this is the combination of all of these help us remember it more often. And every single time you recall an event, you're effectively resaving it in our minds. I actually heard once that when you're recalling a memory, you're not recalling the original event, you're recalling the last time you thought of it. So having repetition and rehearsal also helps imprint memories in our minds. Now, why did we just go through all of this after storytelling? It's because I think as educators, we can really try to emphasize these different things in the work that we do with students. We can realize that emotional impact helps formulate memories in the long-term functions of our brains. And so if we want students to remember learning experiences, we have to tap into their emotions. We have to realize that our students come to us not as blank slates, but as people with different passions and ideas and thoughts and emotions, and we can actually tap into them. We can design learning experiences that are emotional, that are relevant and connect. It's the same with novelty and uniqueness. We've got to shake it up sometimes. We've got to give students empowerment and let them find new ways of learning. And so doing the same thing over and over, unit after unit, lesson after lesson, isn't necessarily as effective as also giving students a novelty and unique experiences. Thinking about sensory details. This is why kinesthetic learning is so important. This is why project-based learning is so important, because there's a hands-on element to it. I remember in college, so much emphasis being put on the different learning types, whether you're a visual learner, auditory learner, or kinesthetic learner. And then there's been lots of research since then that's come out that says, no, nobody is just an auditory learner or just a visual learner or just a hands-on kinesthetic learner. We're actually all of them. Maybe we lean towards a certain one, but all of them are important. And so when we talk about the memory and sensory details, there's loads of value to creating hands-on tactile experiences for our students, and not just second graders, by the way, not just elementary students, for kids in AP literature class, right? Like for kids in geometry class in 10th grade, we need to create ways for learning to be hands-on. And then the last two, personal significance, differentiation, personalized learning. We have to connect with students and create learning experiences that are for them. And the more we stretch ourselves to do this, the better and easier we get at it. And again, the more impactful it is. And then the last one, stress. Stress having this impact on memory. I think there's two main things that I could bring up with this. One, creating authentic stress in the work that students are doing, giving them real problems to solve that can be stressful, that matter, but then also motivate them to want to solve those problems and overcome that stress. There's nothing wrong with cortisol. There's nothing wrong with stress as long as we're able to manage it. And so I think it's okay to lean into it as long as we're equipping students to deal with it. But then also realizing, and I said this a moment ago, students are not blank slates. School, life, childhood, adolescence, it can all be stressful. And we have to recognize that, and we have to just be guides in our students' stories and come along them and help them through stressful times, and help them evaluate and process emotions, give them unique experiences that might shine a little light in the middle of stress, help them have hands-on learning experiences that help them grow in their learning experiences, whether they're stressful or not, building relationships and connecting with them and tapping into personal significance. Doing that all in the midst of stress is powerful. And then the last one, repetition and rehearsal. It's doing all of these things more often. Right? It's realizing, wow, emotion is powerful. I need to design more of this. We need to repeat it. Novelty and unique experiences. Wow, there is power in this and students seem to love it. I need to repeat. I need to be repetitive about new experiences. And it's the same with everything else. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. I'm kind of going a little off the dome here as I think about all this, but I like it. So I might take a little time to write it down in a more formal way and see what it turns into. Maybe this is a nice video. Who knows? Maybe this could be a book down the road. I don't know. I love talking about this because it's all connected to stories. And that's what EPIC means, by the way. You know, when I say EPIC Classroom podcast, my book, The EPIC Classroom, EPIC, it's not about big, it's not about huge and grand. It's about memorable stories. And that's what we're invited to be a part of with our students. How do we create learning experiences that are stories? How do we tap in to our own storytelling abilities? How do we enter our students' stories and become guides alongside them, within them? That's our invitation as educators, and it is beautiful, good work. So, with all that being said, if you are a teacher or a parapro or a principal or a school leader or whatever you do, or a counselor or a bus driver or whatever you do in schools, I hope you realize that you are doing really, really significant, impactful work. You are impacting students in ways that they will not even begin to comprehend for a long time. Some of those teachers that I shared stories about a little bit ago, most of them I've never been able to find them on the internet and let them know the deep impact they had on me. They have no idea how impactful they were, and yet there is no doubt about how impactful they were. So if you're doing that work, thank you for that. And as you enter, hopefully a summer break coming up soon, I hope it is restful and you can recharge as you begin to think of more ways to impact students next year. So anyway, thanks for following along. If you've been listening to this whole podcast today, I hope you enjoyed it. I've got a new book coming out on July 3rd. It's called The New Teacher Mindset. I co-wrote it with my friend, Dr. John Spencer, and we cannot wait to put it out into the world. It's for new teachers, but it's not just for new teachers. It's for any teacher who wants to develop a mindset for the type of work that happens in school nowadays. It's changing, it's pivoting, what the world looks like, and we have to adapt, but we also have to hold on to the good stuff that is tried and true. So that's what the book's about. I cannot wait for you to read it. I will put the link for pre-order so you can get it on the day that it comes out. I would just be so honored. And then we also have some other new teacher stuff coming out very, very soon as well, called the New Teacher Academy. Really exciting. You can check all that out at newteachermindset.com. Thank you, friends, for following along. I promise to put out more podcasts going forward now that my leg isn't nearly as broken as it used to be. So anyway, thank you, everybody. Talk to you next time. My name is Trevor Muir, and this is the Epic Classroom Podcast.